location in the shade. It is Maryland, but it's not. We're in Pennsylvania today, but it's still the mid-Atlantic. So sun, humidity, you had to put the sunglasses on. I am dying. But now that we're in the shade and we can get back into this story, Matt, where were we?
Well, the Federal cavalry under John Buford has been holding during the morning, but now the First Corps has come up. John Reynolds' First Corps is here, and they are now going to have make a decision as to what's going to happen next with this defense. And is it Buford that's kind of making this decision because he's already been here, or is Reynolds, being the more senior commander because he's the infantry and a wing commander, is he kind of taking the reins?
Yeah, Reynolds is going to make the big decision. Buford has already made one crucial decision, and that was just to defend this position.
Sure.
But he didn't have to do that. He didn't have any orders to defend Gettysburg.
No.
He was essentially on a reconnaissance mission. His job was to try to locate where's the Confederate Army, how strong are they, what are they doing, where are they going. So he didn't have an order that said, you will defend Gettysburg because we need to hold that position. He made the decision that Gettysburg should be defended and that he could interpret his orders that way, that he should defend the position. And I think he makes that decision based upon just really good, sound, strategic operational thinking. You can look at a map and you can see, the rebels are going to get an advantage if they gain this crossroads. I don't want them to get it easily. And I know, based on orders, that the First Corps is coming to Gettysburg tomorrow, July 1st, and the 11th Corps is coming up the supporting distance, which means you're just close enough that you can march in case they get engaged. You can join the battle.
Yeah, they're going to hear you fighting.
Right,
They're going to pick up the pace.
That's what you mean by supporting distance.
Yeah.
So it could be, like 5 miles or 4 miles, something like that. So Buford, by his delaying action out here, gives Reynolds the option to be able to make a decision as to what he's going to do. And Reynolds is going to make his decision not based on, hey, this is just what I want to do. He's going to make his decision based upon what are my orders from Meade? What am I allowed to do? And he's been given a fair amount of flexibility from Meade in his orders. And that is, if you are interpreting them, you can read them in the ORs. They're in the official records. You can see everything that Reynolds had. Reynolds could defend Gettysburg. He could fall back on the heights south of town and try to defend that, or he can fall back to near the Pennsylvania-Maryland line towards Taneytown, defending the approaches to Emmitsburg and Taneytown.
Is that the Pipe Creek line?
No, it's not the Pipe Creek line, because the Pipe Creek circular that Meade has drawn up and issued to his corps commanders is going to go out in the early morning of July the 1st. Reynolds is never going to receive it,
Right?
because he'll be dead by the time it would arrive with him. So you have to take everything before the Pipe Creek circular is what Reynolds knows.
Okay.
And the orders under which Reynolds is operating.
That makes sense.
So the boldest, riskiest move that Reynolds could make would be to fight out here, where he actually ends up fighting. The middle road is to fight on the key terrain of the battlefield south of town. Cemetery Hill, Corpse Hill, Cemetery Ridge, Little Round Top. Problem with starting your battle there is if you get driven off of that, you've lost it.
Right. Yeah, because
right?
now they own it. Right.
They own it.
Immediately.
And then the safest option, which I think a lot of people, cautious generals are going to take, is to fall back towards the strength of the army, which is in the direction of Emmitsburg and Taneytown. So you'll fall back there, let Reynolds kind of delay the enemy. But the problem with that movement, and I think this may be, we don't know what Reynolds sees in this, is that gives the initiative to the rebels.
Right.
They've got the initiative.
Never
now.
hand it off.
And never, ever hand the initiative to the enemy. Because if you're someone like Reynolds, you've seen every time you've done that, Lee beats you.
Right.
So
Especially if you're not standing where you're supposed to be at the Battle of Fredericksburg, right? When you gain initiative by, say, I don't know, hypothetically breaking through Jackson's lines and Meade is looking for you. Don't give the initiative to the enemy, though.
But yeah, I mean, in this instance, Reynolds, this is a really bold decision that he makes, because what he knows he's doing is committing Meade to a battle at Gettysburg. And Because one of the things in one of the statements that Meade makes in one of the orders that he sends to them, he says, I must concentrate where the enemy displays the greatest force. So if you take that sentence, if you were Reynolds, well, the enemy's displaying his greatest force now, right here.
Right.
This is it. And I'm looking at a map. This is a natural concentration point because all the roads converge on this.
Right.
So it's easy for the Army to concentrate here. But in order for them to concentrate on the key terrain, I got to buy time out here. So we have to fight a delaying action. So that's really what ends up making Herbst Woods this point of contention, or the McPherson farm, which is just over here to my left a little ways. They become points of no real value if you possess them, if you're the Confederates, but great value if you're the Union in making the Confederates pay a high price to take them.
That's huge, yeah.
But, I mean,
I didn't think of it that way before. That's really interesting.
what doesn't, I mean, you know, what it doesn't provide any solace for is the guys who've got to do the paying.
Right.
You know, so if you're in Stone's Pennsylvania Brigade, or you're in the Iron Brigade over here, you are going to literally be in the fight of your life, because they could see the Confederate forces being arrayed against them, and they knew that they were heavily outnumbered. Now, for the Confederates, we kind of dropped that story about, you know, Henry Heath comes on, he thinks he can handle this whole thing, he orders 2 brigades forward, and he has 4 brigades. Right. So typically, if you were expecting some sort of resistance, you're going to deploy 2 brigades up front, 2 brigades in support.
Right.
He does not deploy his 2 reserve brigades in support.
Does he leave them in column?
He leaves them in column, as far as we can tell.
Wow.
In the road. So that tells me.
Wow, he really thought they were going to brush him off.
He thought they were going to brush him off. This was going to be easy. And so Reynolds arrives in the field, meets Buford, makes a decision, we're going to fight. The other thing that's super risky about this decision that he makes is that within an hour's march, when he meets with Buford, he has 1 division. That's Wadsworth's division. About 2 hours, he'll get his other 2 divisions. About 3 hours, he'll start to get the 11th Corps. So he's got a long time.
I mean, that's a huge window to get driven out of the woods, driven off this field. That's an eternity.
So it's one of the reasons why Reynolds, I think, he realizes what a great risk he's taking. And he's out here on the field, near where we're at right now, personally placing units. Like, he places an artillery battery in a very forward position. And he even tells the battery commander, I need you to draw their artillery fire.
Oh.
So I can get my infantry deployed, and then I'm going to pull you out of there. So he's telling him, like, look, I know I'm putting you in a
get shot at.
I know I'm putting you in a hot spot, but I've got to get my infantry in position. And he realizes he's got to block this road.
Right.
So he's going to deploy 1 brigade, or most of a brigade, north of the road, part of the brigade south of it, and then Meredith's Iron Brigade is tasked with taking Herbst Woods. And they make one really important decision at this beginning deployment, is they order the 6th Wisconsin of the Iron Brigade to hold as reserve, as a divisional reserve. And the end result is kind of 2 big swinging doors out here. The Iron Brigade hits Archer's Brigade in Herbst Woods. Archer is not expecting this at all. In fact, Archer thought this whole advance was a very bad idea. In fact, he tried to tell Heath, he had a bad feeling about it. He didn't like going in.
I don't want to go into the woods
without any support or anything like that. And it ends up, it's a catastrophe. He gets outflanked by the Iron Brigade. The Iron Brigade, I mean, they just maneuver so well on a battlefield. They're really well disciplined. They're really well led. They're also a really aggressive unit. And I mean, the thing is, sometimes with some of these units that become famous, there's always a group of people that begins to try to break them down. They weren't that good. They were there, and there were other guys. And I'm like, look, man, I've looked at a lot of units, and this was an elite unit in the Army of the Potomac. They may not have been the best brigade in the Army. There were other brigades that were really, really good and just as good as them, but they were a crack unit. And you just see it in the way they maneuver and how they hit. They hit hard. So they hit Archer really hard. They rolled up his brigade. He gets captured. Yep. It's a debacle. The brigade gets driven back. But over north of us, Davis's North Carolina Mississippi Brigade outflanks Lysander Cutler's brigade of Wadsworth's division and drives them back into. They retreated all the way into the edge of Gettysburg. However, in this really tough fight, they get very disorganized, and Doubleday, it's Doubleday at this point.
Not baseball.
It's not baseball. Doubleday orders the 6th Wisconsin to counterattack. And they get joined by 2 regiments that were in this field just in front of me near the McPherson farm that were from Cutler's brigade, the 95th New York and the 84th New York, which always went by the 14th Brooklyn. They changed front and advanced after the 6th Wisconsin started its charge. So you had 3 regiments that hit Davis in the flank. And the 6th is the one that takes all the prisoners. They took about 250 prisoners. Davis's brigade was utterly wrecked. They lost every field officer except for 2. They took tremendous losses. They were so badly beat up that they didn't bring them back into action again for the rest of the battle on July the 1st. They will come back into the battle on July the 3rd. But like the 2nd Mississippi, they had 290 or 300 men at the opening of the action. They had 60 that night.
Oh.
So now some of those guys are going to come back. They're just kind of
been dispersed,
shaken loose. But I mean, the losses are tremendous. So anyway, Heath runs into a buzzsaw. So suddenly he's like, whoa, okay, all right, now we're in a real fight. But the other part of this that is a real negative for the Union Army is that General Reynolds is riding around here placing all these troops, and when he rides over here into the edge of Herbst Woods, the 2nd Wisconsin, which is the 1st Regiment of the Iron Brigade, coming up into the woods, he literally like turns his horse and starts to lead an infantry charge. And he says, forward men, forward, for God's sakes, drive those people out of the woods. The woods, when we look at these woods behind us now, there's a lot of undergrowth in here. Actually, the woods, I've walked through them a few times recently. They're looking really, really healthy. Because we had a forester back when I worked for the Park Service who came in here and helped us try to rejuvenate some of these historic woodlots. A woodlot like this in 1863, John Herbst owned this woodlot. He was a farmer whose farm was south of us. It was nicknamed McPherson Woods by Union officers who fought here because the McPherson farm, he was a congressman. He wasn't a farmer. John Slentz was the guy who actually farmed that for Edward McPherson. He was a tenant farmer. But because he was close by, people were like, oh, that must be his woods. This was actually Herbst Woods. Herbst would have grazed cattle in there, or maybe some sheep, hogs, stuff like that. So they would have kept a lot of the brush down. He would have also been very particular about what tree species were growing in there. So if you were standing here, you could look through the woods.
Right.
Like you'd see
So you would see this mass of men moving into it, or moving through it necessarily.
You could have seen the Confederates in the woods coming up through here. And there's a story that some people may be apocryphal, but I've actually found like 3 accounts that supposedly a Confederate soldier was heard to shout as he saw the Iron Brigade coming out. There's them black-hatted fellers. Tain't no militia, that's the Army of the Potomac. Yeah. Now, people are like, okay, that's
metal, it's what it is.
Nobody ever said that. But here's the thing, I found several contemporary accounts of Confederate soldiers saying, we were told we were going to meet militia.
Right.
And what this Confederate soldier is probably saying as he sees these guys coming at them, that isn't militia.
Right.
They don't move like that. They don't come right at us after we just fired a volley into them and shot a bunch of them. That's the Army of the Potomac. Yeah. That's what I think all he was saying. Because there's
it's a great line, regardless.
Yeah, because let's be real. People are people. The reality, there's probably 100 guys on that line that said literally, "Oh shit, they have black hats." That's the Army of the Potomac. Like they know what's coming because at that point their reputation precedes them. We'll get into the Iron Brigade while Matt and I are driving around from the field because I have some thoughts on, like you said, an elite unit. Like I am a fan of the Irish Brigade because I have the last name McGuire. I have lineage connections. But the Iron Brigade or the Irish Brigade is a not here is a unit that has a good reputation, but also has an overblown reputation, in my opinion,
Sure.
at times. The Iron Brigade are heavyweights, so we'll talk a little bit about that. But I think that reputation, though these Confederates likely are, speaking very frankly, I'm sure there is some poetry,
Yeah.
apocryphal, whatever, but I'm sure there's also a lot of, oh, crap, but like I said a minute ago with the beep, because that's people being people. So, especially when you know what's going to come with you with that unit's going to smack you right in the face.
Well, and it's telling them that, look, it's not just, as you were saying, militia. The Army of the Potomac has arrived.
They're here.
They thought they were going to bowl these guys,
Yeah.
and it's not going to happen now.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of typical with, because the individual soldier doesn't generally, there's a lot of rumors that are always flying around, but they don't generally concern themselves with the grand strategy.
Sure.
Now, some of them are interested in it. You'll see it in their letters that they write things. You're like, how do they know that? So you know that they're sharing a lot of things, but your officers are always going to try and tell your guys, like, hey, man, this is going to probably be an easy thing today. It's just, I mean, it's just some militia out there. So
Those militia have black
don't worry.
hats.
I mean, John Reynolds, before he rides up here, early morning, July the 1st, his artillery brigade chief, Charles Wainwright, Colonel Charles Wainwright.
Who has opinions on everyone, by the way.
Yes, and it's great. His diary is one of the great diaries of the Civil
wild.
War.
It is. It's a great
But Wainwright, July 1st is the beginning or the end of a quarter. So you had to do all these quarterly reports. How many hand spikes do you have? How many, shrapnel? How many claws do you have? How much harness? You have? All this stuff. A lot of paperwork that you have to do. If you're going to fight a battle, you don't want to start the paperwork.
Yeah,
right?
that's a good point.
We better get in a fight, guys. I definitely do not want to do paperwork today.
So-
Matt, that's what we do from here on out. Anytime we have to do paperwork, we're going to go street fight other podcasts. Put our belts on the line. Oh.
But Wainwright went to Reynolds in the morning and he said, do you think there's any prospect of a fight today? Because he's like, hey man, we're going to shoot ammunition off and stuff like that. I don't want to be counting all this stuff.
Yeah.
And Reynolds, who knows a lot about where the Confederate Army is, he says, no, I don't think so. So that tells you Reynolds was surprised himself that there was an engagement this day.
Right.
Reynolds probably thought it was going to happen July 2nd. So even Reynolds is a little bit surprised by what happens here. And Heath, going back to Henry Heath, now at this point, Heath redeploys his division. He brings his two supporting brigades up. He starts recollecting Davis's and Archer's brigades. He realizes, oh boy, we got to fight now. This is the Army of the Potomac is here. We didn't think they were here. Now he's going to let A.P. Hill know. And here's another really significant leadership thing. A.P. Hill orders this reconnaissance in force. Right. I think it tells you that A.P. Hill doesn't expect anything's going to happen. He stays in Cashtown, which is about almost 10 miles west of us. So he stays at his headquarters in Cashtown. He lets Heath go forward. He lets Pender's division follow him. He's not worried about anything. He can follow those guys at his leisure. Right. And then he's going to get a report. Hey, boss, we just ran into a buzzsaw, and it's the Army of the Potomac. So now A.P. Hill is going to react to what has happened here. John Reynolds rode ahead of all of his men. He reacted to an unforeseen situation, but he was on the ground and could make those decisions that are going to shape the battle. So Reynolds and Buford picked the battlefield, shaped the battle that's going to be fought. And Heath, A.P. Hill, and everybody else who comes in here is going to react to what those decisions have been made. That's really significant. You always want to be the guys who try to pick the ground and pick where you're going to fight.
This is a really bloody setup, D.Scott. I mean, if you think about what this is, right, in very simple terms, Buford recognizes we need to be a screen. And then Reynolds gets here and recognizes we need to reinforce this screen so that we can push the chess pieces around so that when I feel like in their mind, this isn't even the battle. Like in our world, it's the battle because it's the first day of it. But in their mind, the battle's going to be what happens after they do all this, and it's going to be tomorrow. So like, they're all just setting it up. But you talk about the cost of these lines slamming into each other in the woods. What happens out here in the field? Like this is a horrible prelude. It's a setup. I mean, they're not thinking this is the show. Right. Bro, you're in the show at this point. I mean, I hate to break it to you, John, especially you, John. You're about to find out real shortly you're in the show. But, I mean, that's just, as you're talking, it's like, I always try to find, what is the Occam's razor explanation? Like, if somebody has no background in this, how can I make them understand what this is in 5 minutes or less? I mean, this is a setup that is just paid for in blood.
Yeah.
Straight up. I mean, it's
Yeah.
paid for by Buford's guys to hold that initial screen long enough for that, was it 3 hours? For Reynolds to start showing up.
Mm-hmm.
And then Reynolds sees the same situation, makes his decision, you know. And it's wild that in their mind, this is all to set up something that hasn't happened yet, but they're actually a part of it.
Yeah.
This is the opening. This is the first gnashing of the teeth of this fight.
Yeah, no,
wild.
that's a really good point. That it's they wouldn't see this as this is the battle.
Right.
The battle is what's going to happen
coming,
after
yeah.
this. This is setting up the battle.
Right.
So years ago, I did this tour. It was early on when I was in the Park Service with General Don Starry. He was the commander of 5th Corps in Europe.
Wow.
And he was a Korean War, Vietnam, you know, really experienced general. But he also had, on the tour was a buddy of his who was the Quartermaster General of the British Army at that time period, who was a World War II veteran. And we spent 2 entire days in the battlefield. It was unbelievable.
That would have been
So anyway,
amazing.
it was amazing, right? So we're out on the battlefield. Anyway, the thing I never forgot about it was the very end of it. The British general, his name was Wolseley, said to me, he goes, he learned about the whole battle. He said, Buford and Reynolds. He says, they're the key. He says, they knew the ground. And I never forgot that because Wolseley came here as a professional soldier with no real knowledge of Gettysburg other than it had been a big battle, it had been a Union victory. He didn't know anything about it.
Right.
And this was his professional assessment after being over the field. I never forgot that, how he saw this and the decisions that these men made, and that the 2 men who emerged really at the top of the heap for him were Reynolds and Buford because of their assessment of the ground and their decision to trade men for time, particularly Reynolds' decision to do that, which sets up Meade to be able to fight the sort of battle that Meade really wanted to fight.
Yeah.
Right.
And that if they had pursued the Pipe Creek Circular as Meade wanted to do, then what you're talking about is they just also ceded the initiative to Lee.
Which you do not do.
And Lee probably would have had Jeb Stuart back. He would have had his whole army united. And you never want to be passive in the face of Lee and hope that Lee is going to somehow attack you in the position you've chosen.
Right.
So the situation here at Gettysburg is that Lee is going to end up being compelled to attack Meade in the position that Meade wanted to occupy or wants to occupy or is given by the fighting of the 1st and the 11th Corps on July the 1st in Beaufort. But why does Lee have to attack him there? Well, he has to attack him there because on July 1st, he scores a victory. He wants to follow up on the victory.
Yeah, you can't win and then take your foot off the gas.
And
right?
you also have to, step back and say, why is Lee in Pennsylvania? What's the objective of this invasion into Pennsylvania? And then there's a lot of nonsense that people have written about. The biggest one is that Lee invaded the North to feed his army.
Yes. This is my favorite part of it. If you haven't listened to the episode yet, listen to it. This is my favorite part of it, but we're going to talk about it here. Secondary objectives, primary objectives.
Right. That is the secondary objective, feeding the army. He has to feed the army. And great if he can come up into Pennsylvania and draw supplies from here because, it doesn't put any pressure on the South.
Live off the enemy for a while.
Live off the enemy for a while. It's not why you're here. You're not here to feed your army. Right. You weren't in such a desperate situation that you had to come into Pennsylvania. Otherwise, Lee could have never fought the Overland Campaign in 1864.
Yeah.
Right? That never could have happened.
Right.
Right? If staying in Virginia meant his army would have starved. It's not going to starve because that's your supply base.
Yep.
So his objective is the Army of the Potomac. That's why he came here. I mean, a secondary objective is to capture Harrisburg, the state capital of Pennsylvania. Big political embarrassment to the Lincoln administration. I mean, again, everything you're trying to do if you're Lee is to send a signal to the people of the North. You can't beat us.
Yeah.
We can beat your armies on your own soil.
Right.
We can threaten your state capitals. We can march with impunity on your land. We don't want your land. Just leave us alone. Let us go. Get rid of this government that you got right now. Vote in a different government. Let's settle some sort of negotiation. So the way you do that is you got to beat that army. You got to beat the Army of the Potomac, and you have to beat them here in Pennsylvania if you can. So if you're Lee after the July 1st, there they are.
Yeah.
That's your objective in this campaign.
And you've already got them once, so let's keep going.
So, you can have a General Longstreet saying, hey, sir, I think we ought to maneuver and try to get around these guys, get between them and Washington D.C.
Yep.
And then if you're Lee, you're like,
Shut up, James.
Okay, how are we going to do that? How are we going to do that? Right. I don't have the best cavalry. Okay, you can always say, yeah, Lee has a lot of cavalry with his army. The brigades that he has, like for an example, in Bowdoin's brigade is so poorly disciplined that they're like a hot potato in Ewell's corps. No infantry commander wants them with them. Right. Because that was Jenkins' cavalry brigade, Jenkins' brigade, because they were just really ill-disciplined. They were getting into trouble. They were looting and doing stuff like that. They weren't very aggressive about gathering intel and so on. They were good for guarding prisoners, picketing positions, protecting supply trains, gathering supplies.
It sounds like they wanted to be a part of the war but not fight.
Well, they just don't have the discipline like the brigades that Stuart takes with him. Right. They're your crack units.
Sure, of course.
They're your elite units that they're not afraid to engage the enemy. They're gonna gather intel. They know how to do it. They're aggressive. They want to fight. And then there's another brigade, Grumble Jones's brigade, but Stuart left them so far south. Right. They're not here to help Lee. So if you're Lee and Longstreet's suggesting let's maneuver against them, you're Lee. You're like,
how?
Well, I don't know where 5 corps are, right, and 2 divisions of their cavalry. So you're telling me to maneuver against that in a ground. Also, the other thing you have to do if you put yourself in Lee's shoes, you're like, okay, what roads are we using? Because we're going to be on this side of the mountains. So if we run into a buzzsaw and another big fight, right, what's our route of escape? We don't have one until we get down to Emmitsburg. So if you're Lee, there's a great risk in trying to make a movement like that Longstreet was suggesting. You're much better off fighting the battle here. Now, some people might say, well, I mean, yeah, but why didn't he take up a defensive position? You can't do that. You're feeding your army off the land. You have to take the initiative. You have to attack. Meade knows that. So Meade can fight a defensive battle. Lee is forced into the role he doesn't want to be in. I have to attack the enemy in a position he's chosen. And he does still almost win the battle. I mean, so it's not like this is foreordained that the Union Army is going to win the battle now at this point. I mean, the Confederates absolutely could have won this battle. It took a lot of really hard fighting to win the battle for the Union Army. But I mean, the point is that all these events kind of cascade and build on one another and lead ultimately to the Union victory. So we can't say, for example, well, I mean, the reason the Union Army won the battle is the decisions John Reynolds made on July the 1st. He won the battle for him. No, he set up the ability for them to win the battle.
He gave them the ability to do the other decisions or decision making that needed to be made. So, I mean, but that's kind of all this 101. Nothing happens in a vacuum. You know, this isolated incident, sure, you can look at it in definitive terms if you're only talking about this, which if you're only talking about day one, this is a Confederate victory and the Union loses the battle. But it's not a vacuum. It's a much bigger thing. Yeah. And his moment is a success for other people to have opportunity to make decisions. Like I was thinking, because I've been making jokes this whole time, like without John Reynolds, you don't get bayonets. Chamberlain doesn't get a chance to be Chamberlain, right?
True. It's true. That's right.
I don't lament that one. Actually.
It's very true. I mean, and without the guys, like Meredith's Iron Brigade, Stone's Pennsylvania Brigade, other soldiers of the First Corps, and even the 11th Corps. The 11th Corps gets a really bad rap in the battle. They did not have the greatest morale. They
had like a bad 60 days, Scott.
They did not like their corps commander. They didn't like them. They did not like Howard. Howard did not necessarily like them. They were put in a terrible position. There was some poor generalship as far as cooperation by Barlow pushing way out beyond where he should have probably been because he thought it was a defensible position. So the 11th Corps really gets mauled in this battle. But some of the units of the Corps fought really, really well. The 1st Corps had a better position and they took advantage of it. And they fought really well. I mean, but every unit of the 1st Corps lost 50% of their men. I mean, it's staggering losses. And so right behind us here, a while ago we were talking about how all the regimental commanders in Meredith's Iron Brigade are like, we
Yeah,
don't like
no.
our position.
This sucks.
They're all told hold the position at all costs. And at about 3 in the afternoon, they get attacked. So the Confederate attacks in the afternoon build up because reinforcements start to arrive. Ewell starts to arrive from the north.
Sure.
He occupies Oak Hill, the key terrain, puts a lot of artillery up there. That's going to make it very difficult for the Union defenders out here. They all have to take cover from that artillery fire because it would enfilade them. So if you were standing on Oak Hill about a half hour after the artillery started to fire, you probably wouldn't see any Union soldiers anymore because they all
Kind of
move into
dispersed.
positions that you can't see them.
Right.
And then the Confederates just do a miserable job at the beginning of coordination. So Ewell allows Rhodes to make an attack. Rhodes makes an attack against the right of the First Corps on the northern end of Oak Ridge. It's an absolute debacle. Iverson's brigade loses 1,000 men
Yikes.
in the assault. They go from 1,500 men to 500.
Jeez.
O'Neill's brigade gets routed. They don't lose as many men, but they lose a lot of POWs. It's a debacle. I mean, so Rhodes's initial attack is really easily repulsed. Well, I say easily. I mean, there's a lot of hard fighting, but it's a debacle for them. And meanwhile, out here to the west, Henry Heath, he's joined by A.P. Hill, and then Robert E. Lee has arrived. And Lee is very upset by the fact that the battle.
I said not to do this.
Right.
I literally straight said, don't do this, jackass.
So Heath asked permission to advance because he can see Ewell's becoming engaged.
He's like, well, now, sure.
But the thing that's kind of interesting about this, and because we don't know what sort of communications that could occur between corps commanders. I mean, isn't anybody like communicating and saying, hey, we're going to open an attack, we need your support? I don't know. Maybe they did. But anyway, Heath goes to Hill, and Lee, who are both together, says, Ewell's becoming engaged, can I advance? And Lee says, no, I'm not prepared to bring on a general engagement. So Lee had also sent orders to Ewell, telling Ewell not to bring on a general engagement. And Ewell gets on the battlefield and he writes in his report, he says, well,
I brought on a
too
general
late.
engagement.
Well, what Ewell says is it's too late. A general engagement's been brought on. And the worst thing we can do is sit here.
Right.
So I'm going after him. So Ewell initiates the action. I've always found Ewell, he's such an interesting character in this battle because the legend of Ewell, the narrative of Ewell is that he's indecisive, can't make up his mind, just isn't very aggressive. That is so far from the truth. Right. He is decisive, he's aggressive on July the 1st. He goes right after him.
Well, we've even seen that earlier in the campaign with 2nd Winchester.
Right,
He
right.
rolls 2nd
Right.
Winchester.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So he's, I think that, there's a lot of mythology that grows up about these battles because you have some very skilled writers like Douglas Southall, Freeman, Clifford Doughty, who write about it in defense of Lee.
Right.
So they have to find other scapegoats, and Ewell became a very convenient one. But anyway, once they could see some Union troops, I think it was in Stone's brigade is what they were observing, being shifted to fight Ewell's men. And Heath goes back again, close to 3 o'clock, 2:30, 3 o'clock, to ask permission if he can advance because he says they're shifting troops to fight Ewell. And at this point, Lee's kind of like, well, okay, yeah, we got to do it. So he releases them about 3 p.m. Heath's division attacks. So Heath is going to attack with what's left of Archer's brigade, Pettigrew's brigade, which is the biggest brigade in the army. It's almost 2,900 men.
Wow.
And Brockenbraugh's brigade. They're all going to attack south of the Chambersburg Pike. And then that's going to bring on just a horrific bloodbath, because when the 26th North Carolina and the 11th North Carolina come up against the Iron Brigade, it is literally, truly an epic battle. I mean, these two units just waste each other. You've got this Union brigade that is called the Iron Brigade, so you don't give ground.
Yeah, no.
Right?
You didn't know that one
You have
soft.
a reputation.
Right.
You have the 26th North Carolina, which is kind of like the pride of the state now. You got this Henry Burgoyne, this young guy, very popular, handsome dude, who's the colonel of the regiment, the pride of the state. You don't cut and run.
Right.
You're going to drive the Yankees. So, I mean, it is, just to get some sense of how bloody it is, if you go down the Willoughby Run, I mean, it's about as wide as from this fence to the edge of the soybean field. So,
What are we talking? 12 feet?
maybe
15?
10 feet.
10 feet maybe?
Maybe. 4 color bearers are shot
Yo.
in the 26th North Carolina, getting across the creek.
Jeez.
Okay, that
Just
gives
crossing Willoughby Run.
just crossing Willoughby Run.
Whew.
4 color bearers are shot. That gives you some sense of just how bad it gets. I mean, it is a horrific fight. The lieutenant colonel of the 26th North Carolina said at one point in the fight, he said the woods were as dark as night. The smoke was so heavy. And it's just a game of numbers. So the 11th North Carolina is able to outflank the 19th Indiana. They put a real hurt on the 19th. 19th has to give ground. Then the 24th Michigan has to give ground. But all these things, these units are giving ground. I mean, they're just, it's a fight. The whole movement back is a fight.
If they're giving inch by inch ground,
It's
they're
inch
not
by
giving up
inch.
yards.
It
They're
is
giving up like by
fall
foot
back
by
from
foot.
tree to tree and just pouring this fire in.
Jeez.
At one point, the colors Henry Burgoyne finally took the colors because the color bearer was killed. So they gave the colors to another guy. He gets shot through the head. He gets killed. Burgoyne picks the flag up because they realized at that point so many men have been killed carrying the colors or wounded that
Nobody's picking them up anymore?
the morale in the regiment was like, I don't think we can keep going forward.
No.
Guys were beginning to like
Hunker down. Yeah.
So he picks up the flag and is kind of trying to inspire the guys to go forward. And then he takes.
I was going to say, this is going to go well.
It didn't go well.
Yeah.
He took a bullet that mortally wounded him, so he goes down. And then the colors are laying on the ground, and the lieutenant colonel, his name was Lane, I think it was John Lane, he goes to pick up the colors. And this lieutenant who's nearby says, no one can pick those up and live. And Lane, who's clearly a brave man, picked the colors up.
And what happens?
Well, he made it a ways. I mean,
Hey.
he made it a ways.
A ways, though.
He
So it
didn't-
sounds like there's a finality.
There's
to
a
this.
finality to it. He gets up
I don't
and
mean to laugh.
he rallies the guys, and they start to press on. I mean, just with their numbers that they have, they push the Iron Brigade back. Then the 151st Pennsylvania, because I mentioned that they weren't all the Iron Brigade that fight in the woods. The 151st Pennsylvania came up to the edge of the woods to support the Iron Brigade. And they're going to fight the 11th North Carolina and part of the 26th. They lose 337 men, I believe. I mean, they lose like 65% of the regiment. They just get cut to pieces. Supposedly, a guy from the 24th Michigan, as they were leaving the woods, stopped at the edge of the woods and rested his rifle on a tree because he saw these Rebs coming up through the woods, pursuing them. And he saw this guy yelling, carrying the flag. It was Lane.
It was Matt.
And
That's the Michigan guy, just for the record. He's from Michigan.
he fired, hit Lane in the jaw. I believe the bullet went through his jaw out the other side,
Gnarly.
knocked him unconscious. He fell down. A really interesting story about this, a cool story, is that 25 years later, I believe it was 25 years later, Lane is here for it might have been 1887, it might have been the 25th anniversary, and he meets this guy, McConnell, from the 24th Michigan.
He's like, oh, I shot you in the face.
And McConnell is pretty sure he's the guy who shot Lane, so they
Wow.
become buddies.
There you go.
I would not want to be friends with that guy. I'd be like, you know what, dude? F you. Good shot. Don't talk to me again. Goodbye.
Yeah, it's always been amazing to me sometimes how these guys really let go. A lot of these men of, look, it was war.
Yeah.
It was war. You were trying to kill me. I was trying to kill you. It's not war anymore. We're done. Let's be buddies. We can be friends now. We're friends now. And he got along completely fine with McConnell. Rufus Dawes carried on all his correspondence with the major of the 2nd Mississippi, Stone, who he took the sword from Stone and captured their colors and stuff like that. And he and Stone were trading letters. The color bearer who had carried the flag of the 2nd Mississippi, he and Dawes were writing back and forth all the time. It's really kind of interesting how these guys, it was almost in a way, they knew how serious this was, how tragic it was, but it was almost as in a way, they looked back on it like this was the Super Bowl, and we played this amazing game, and we were all part of it, you know? So we all were part of it. We had this shared experience, and 25 years ago, you wanted to kill me, I wanted to kill you, but I don't want to do that anymore. We're all Americans again. But anyway, I think it's a really interesting...
That analogy hurts me, Scott. I don't know if you root for a team that's ever lost a Super Bowl, but I still have not gotten over the 34-7 beatdown the Ravens put on the Giants in 2000. It's been 23 years. Not over it. So at least these guys, maybe they're better than me. Good for them. I'm apparently just holding on to grudges. But, you know, screw you, Ravens.
Jeez.
I'm not bitter.
But anyway, you know, the Iron Brigade on July 1st is going to lose, I believe it was 1,227 men. For a brigade of 1,800 men,
right?
Devastating. That's not even describable.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
I mean, and they'll retreat from the woods. The 151st covered their retreat at a cost of about 65% of the regiment. All the other units around them are all forced to retreat. So everybody retreated about a half mile across these open fields to Seminary Ridge. And all the artillery of the 1st Corps had been placed on Seminary Ridge because they couldn't have it out on these forward bridges because the Confederates had artillery superiority.
Right.
And they'd hurt Heath's division so badly. So the 26th North Carolina lost 550 men in the fight for these woods. The 24th Michigan lost 396. Those two regiments suffered the highest loss of the whole battle of Gettysburg for their two armies.
Right here
in these woods.
And you consider that happens during the setup. Like
Right.
we consider
Right.
it
Exactly.
the battle, but
Right.
this is all happening in what is a
Right.
prelude moment as far as the people are concerned.
Right.
At least on the Union side.
Wow.
That's unreal.
So I mean,
Scott.
the woods here are just strewn with casualties. I mean, just literally strewn with casualties. But the battle's not over, so the Iron Brigade and all the other brigades fall back to Seminary Ridge, and A.P. Hill commits Pender's division. And again, you know, I think probably what Hill is thinking, we got him on the run, let's hit him hard. We're not going to maneuver, we're going to hit him hard.
Right.
But what he does is exactly what Doubleday or Oliver Otis Howard would want him to do.
Right,
He goes right at their main strength. So he commits, it ends up being two brigades that make the main assault, Perrin's South Carolina Brigade and Scales's North Carolina Brigade. Scales's brigade marches right through where we're standing right now. So the right of the brigade was on the edge of the woods here and it extended over towards the Chambersburg Pike. They come up over the slope that is right in front of me where Reynolds Avenue runs today, and they just get slaughtered by the federal artillery and the infantry fire. They go from 1,300 men to 500. They have one field officer left. If you read the reports, you realize it is, I mean, officers are trying to rally their men, or the few guys that officers are left.
Yeah.
If soldiers aren't obeying any orders, the guys are just trying to get away. Everybody's scattering to the four winds. The brigade's destroyed as a fighting unit, but it's going to be used again on July the 3rd.
Wow.
Well, really bad staff work. Perrin's brigade delivers on this part of the field, the attack of the day for the Confederates. It is extremely well executed and really bravely executed. And they find a seam in the Union defenses up there, and they outflank the defenses, and the whole defense comes apart.
Right.
And everybody starts falling back. They take a lot of prisoners because a lot of these guys are just utterly physically exhausted. They don't have anything left in the tank. And the whole 1st Corps starts streaming into Gettysburg and retreat. Now, if you read the accounts of these guys when they're writing after the war, they're just bitched up a storm about the 11th Corps. The reason we retreated was the 11th Corps. That's not the reason they retreated. They were driven from their position by Pender's attack. The reason a lot of them get captured is because the 11th Corps had retreated, and some of Jubal Early's men had gotten into town, or Ewell's Corps had gone into town, and then 1st Corps troops get trapped and cut off, and they get captured when they get in there. It's a real debacle. The 1st Corps and the 11th Corps and Buford's cavalry, which did not take heavy losses that day, also did an amazing job covering the retreat. Buford's cavalry, really good job. In fact, that's when they took their heaviest losses.
That makes sense.
On July 1st was when they were covering the retreat. They lose, the Union forces lose over 9,000 men.
Yikes.
So that's the price paid trading men for time. But the Confederates lose about 6,800. And what did they gain?
Nothing.
Right. They gain no real advantage other than a moral advantage. So they drive the Union troops from the field. They have the perception of a great victory. This is Chancellorsville all over again. We've routed the Yankees. But some Confederate officers could see that position the Yankees fell back to. That's a tough nut to crack. We should take it now. We should take it now. And then that, of course, that end of the first day leads to, I think Troy's coming up here.
Oh, we got a tour about to crash with in a minute.
In a minute. We'll just move. That leads to one of the bigger controversies of the battle, which is, why didn't the Confederates take Cemetery Hill? And of course, again, the scapegoat of that is Richard Ewell, because Ewell gets an order during the whole rout of the Union forces to take Cemetery Hill if practicable.
Right.
But it is also amended. It is also amended with the statement, "But do not bring on a general engagement." So I've always delighted in taking groups out here and putting them in Ewell's shoes and saying, "Okay, what does that mean?
Right.
What does that mean? How do you interpret that?"
I've always
Look
interpreted.
what's already been done.
I think I've always, before we cut for a second, I think I've always interpreted it as it was meant to be written. If you can do it, do it. If you see that you can't do it, don't do it.
Yeah.
And to me, the confusion exists in our world. Like,
Yeah,
I don't
right.
think this was confusion
Yeah.
for Ewell. I think
I
Ewell
agree
read that
with that.
order and was like, this is plain as day. If I can do it, the
Yeah.
orders are to do it. If I
Yeah.
assess it that I can't do it, I have permission to not do it.
Yeah.
I think we, the armchair people, have
Yeah.
made this a much murkier conversation than it probably was in the moment.